I'm the founder and publisher of Branding in Asia, and today we're having a sit-down chat on Zoom with Kent Wertime. He's the co-CEO of Ogilvy Asia. Nice to sit and talk with you, Ken. How you doing today?
Good to talk with you.
Great. I kind of want to start off, back in 1990, you were just a humble account manager in New York, suddenly set out for Asia as network director and director of client services. What was that like back then, coming to Asia from the United States?
Well, I guess 30 years on, I still feel like a humble account manager because I think in this business, that's what you're in the business to do, is to help your clients. So some senses, while things have changed a lot for me in 30 years, they haven't. 30 years ago, though, I must say I was very lucky to have an opportunity. It was kind of fool's luck that brought me to Asia to begin with a job offer with another agency, but it was very much by design why I stayed. And I've been lucky enough to see just an unprecedented amount of change in 30 years. Just when you think back how much has shifted versus the first time I visited China, India, Vietnam, Thailand, etc. You can just go down the whole list. And so, it was very exciting times, but, I immediately felt that Asia was the future. And frankly, 30 years on, I still wake up every day thrilled to be in Asia and still feeling like this is the future. So, it's changed a lot, but it also hasn't changed in its essential promise, which we've all seen, kind of unfolding over the last few decades.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, we're talking 31 years here. So if you were to compare the first 10 years, the second 10 years, and the third 10 years, has the growth become supercharged in the past decade compared to when you first came?
Well, I mean, look, there's been a very evident physical change of Asia. I mean, the mega cities of Asia, you just look at the skylines of Singapore, Beijing, Shanghai, Ho Chi Minh City, again, track it back 30 years, and it's stunning in a physical sense. I think, though, while that's the most obvious kind of symbol of change, I've just seen a huge change of people in society. I mean, you look at 20-somethings in the workplace across Asia that are much more bound by I think a common kind of attitude and culture, and frankly, how different 3 generations are in the household today in Asia, and the real gulf of experience between a teen or a young 20s today, their parents and their parents. It's been pretty profound.
That's interesting. I want to talk about recently Ogilvy coined the term velocity, which is described, talking about Asia, described as the accelerating pace at which economic improvement coupled with technology and urbanization transforms middle-class social values, sentiment, and consumer attitudes. Can you talk a little bit more about that and maybe give us some examples?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we actually wrote a report about velocity a couple of years ago that it refers to. And let me explain that bit first, and then I'll talk about just, many examples that are around us today. When we were looking at the future of growth in Asia, we felt it was very important that we kind of retired a very old term that is still used, which is emerging markets. And, it's kind of silly in some senses to call China, which is one of the biggest, most influential markets in the world and a global force, to call it an emerging market. We also felt that there was a kind of mentality that went with viewing many of the rapid growth markets, particularly in Asia, as emerging, because in some ways they're leading. I mean, you look at the sophistication of technology in several of these markets, they're leading the world, not sort of emerging. So we felt it was an inadequate way to talk about the future of growth. And what we also saw in the research we were doing is that it's not just about people having more coin in pocket. It's fundamentally, as you have a middle class that goes from a small proportion of a population to the majority, a true middle class, that they're often the drivers of social change. And what we felt was important to be explaining to our clients and to the market in general is that this economic change is often coupled with very fast changes of consumer attitude and sentiments. Some of it generational. As I said, you look at the 20-somethings, they're part of a global generation that is quite different than the boomers, say. But also we saw in Asia, there was a misperception that societies were getting wealthier, but they were still very conservative. There is no doubt there are major blocks of societies in Asia that have very conservative values, but you particularly see with urban consumers, there's a fast changing set of attitudes about the things they do, they care about, the things they purchase, the type of products they're interested in. And if you have an emerging market mindset, you're probably behind the times. So, velocity is expressed really today through just a number of things that people are doing, they're buying, the way they see issues. I mean, one of the things that I think most companies are running into now is the reality that while it's still quite varied, these issues of sustainability, gender equality, are mattering more and more to consumers. They are looking to buy products from companies that have a purpose. And, it's not simply because these companies are altruistic. They really feel the sting of consumer expectation and demand, of pressure groups, of people who are, online making social commentary about their products, whether it's anti-plastic or, related to some other ecological issue or, something related to society that is putting some pressure on them. You're seeing a huge uptake of a variety of new products and services that reflect an emerging or an emerged middle class that want different things. I mean, it's very interesting, just related to the vector of sustainability. The number of markets now where electric vehicles are starting to get planned or manufactured. Places like Vietnam.
Right. You see that especially in Korea. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's not, everyone talks about Tesla, but frankly, you fast forward another 10 years in Asia, and I think you're going to see just an amazing flourishing of electric vehicles from many different manufacturers that are Asian based. You see this in the way people use their pocketbook. I mean, the incredible growth, if you look at China, of a digital society, a cashless society, of, the entertainment business, the box office pre-COVID, the Chinese tourist was the major force in global tourism because people aren't interested in just acquiring, basic home goods. Their attitudes of how they spend their money and want their leisure time to be when they have more leisure time, is an amazing economic engine. I also think you're seeing a lot of changing and need to about the portrayal of different groups of people. I'd say women amongst the most important of them. The way the modern Asian woman is portrayed, in some senses, some marketers are very good at it now. They're very unstereotypical, yet I still see a lot of advertising that one could say is way too stereotypical and not reflective of, Asian women that are working, many of whom now are working in the informal economy, who might be instapreneurs, doing entrepreneurial things online with social selling. How they're raising their kids, their views of parenting have changed for a lot of the younger modern. You go down just an endless list, but the point is, I think very simply, it's not just about, greater spending power, it's everything that comes with it in terms of the fast changing attitudes. And I've seen many brands that are having to catch up to a more progressive segment of the consumer. Again, not every consumer is progressive. We know that around the world, they're not all progressive, but there are bigger segments of consumers, particularly in urban centers, but not exclusively, that have shifting attitudes and shifting consumer demands. And you're going to be behind the times if you're not really looking at how the economic growth is changing people as consumers and as, social members of their societies, right? What they're expecting.
Yeah, good points, actually. You penned an article not too long ago. We actually ran it in Branding in Asia, talking about how the velocity of Asia has been dampened by the pandemic. Beyond just simply getting past the actual pandemic itself, back to normal life again, where we can travel freely, what are some of the other things that it will take to see Asia return to these strong growth trends?
Sorry, I had a little glitch of technology there. You went blank. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I hear you okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay, sorry, we had a lag. My internet connection went bad for about 3 seconds. Let me answer the question. You can just sort of edit it from there, all right? Sorry about that. Internet connections are not perfect.
Yeah.
Look, you did run that article, and thank you for that. I mean, part of what we wanted to be exposing people to is that obviously the pandemic has really taken a bite out of economies, right? That's very clear. In fact, I was reading an article today in a publication talking about 150 million people going backwards out of the middle class. So for the first time in decades, the middle class has been shrinking rather than growing due to the pandemic. And first and foremost, people need to be able to get back to economic activity that allows them to have, changes in their lives. I think the key, though, is that as there is a bounce back, as hopefully COVID gets tamed, as governments, as best they can, continue to try to stimulate economies to recover, I think there's going to be a lot of activity that relates to velocity that's important to look at as well, because change isn't just economic. Obviously, it's a kind of primary driver. You need access to earnings to be able to then afford things that you wish to do.
Right.
But as we were discussing, I think the bounce back will be, will hopefully be bounced back different. In some cases, maybe better. I think brands have had to use this time to continue to relook at their options. More people obviously have been taking up commerce, direct to consumer selling, looking at ways beyond just pure communications, in terms of stakeholder outreach programs that I think are important to people, using PR more. People may not be out there doing the same amount of typical communication, but needing to continue to build their image and build their association with stakeholders in the market, using social media in new ways, testing out many of these platforms for commerce and delivery that maybe people didn't put enough, or brand owners didn't put enough focus on. And so I think that as we bounce back economically in time, and it's very uneven still, right? I mean, China appears to be on a different track than several other markets that are still suffering greater lockdowns and economic suppression as a result. I think there are going to be a number of things that brands are going to try to do differently or accelerate depending upon consumer attitudes. And it will be, continued shift to digital, sustainability, and other issues, of purpose haven't gone away. If anything, they might be accelerated by people rethinking what they do with their money or how they spend their time or what they value. And so I think all of those will contribute to growth in different aspects, along with the obvious most important point, which is simply economic growth, which has been, gone backwards during the pandemic.
It's interesting. You're based in Thailand now. I'm here in Vietnam. Two economies that have a heavy dependence on tourism. So I was kind of curious, what advice would you have for brands? I mean, it's a difficult time. How do they stay front of mind with consumers when international travel is not really an option? Do you have any advice for those brands in the tourism industry?
Yeah, well, as you say, tourism has hit a lot of countries hard that are dependent upon it, and a lot of informal sector jobs are related to it. I think the key is that, this has been an externality, what's happened with the pandemic. So it's not that people have lost interest in travel. If anything, people may value even more what they've lost recently. I certainly know informally from talking with people, there are many people who hanker to be able to get eventually on an airplane and get on a sandy beach they haven't been to, or to our favorite country. So I don't think the desire for it has gone away. What's happened is simply there is literally an impediment, a blockage in terms of safety, and obviously, the various lockdowns that people have when they then go back to their home country. So, I think whether you're in the tourism business representing a national tourism board, or you're in an airline, it's about reminding people why you're there and the value that you play in their lives, and staying connected. I've certainly seen, in the airline business, there are airlines that are doing things to both remind people that when they can get back to travel, that they would be a preferred option, and to continue the connection to that fundamental desire of why they exist, which is to get people to places they want to go. Also, some of that means now, of course, giving people the assurance of safety or other things that they're looking for when they do travel, because not everyone's not on an airplane. I still see airplanes in the sky, not as
Right.
full as they were. But this again goes back to my point that there are so many other ways now to be staying engaged through social media, through stakeholder programs, through PR, that don't mean necessarily pumping out traditional advertising. And some of them are still advertising because they recognize they need to be there as part of the mind space of consumers as things bounce back. So I think there's it's complicated because in some cases you are telling people about travel with us or come to our place and be safe. In other cases, you're reminding people when they are getting back to full travel that they're a desirable destination, that there's things that they want to do, still connected to. This is where data, by the way, is so important, because obviously if you've got good data on people who've traveled to your country, who've been in your hotel, been on your airline, you have identifiable data that you can then use to remind them of things that they have been to or done or might want to do, or points they have with your airline. So, I mean, there are tons of angles, and it just means staying connected more than anything, right? Staying relevant.
On the subject of data, one thing interesting, and I've talked to quite a few people about this because I'm very fascinated with it, is people are on the internet more than ever before. They're surfing the internet. And I'm curious with, most of the data that's been accumulated about consumer surfing behavior was based on a certain amount of hours on the internet. And I'm wondering now, with more people spending more time, with actually sitting in front of the computer longer, have there been any notable changes in how they engage with brands?
Well, look, the first thing on data is that the reality is a lot of data that is collected in the world is simply unused. So the world is not data poor. It's a data deluge. The problem most businesses have is actually using the data they already have to some greater effect. And that's what most marketers are trying to figure out is I've got all this data, I've got data coming in every second of every day through addressable channels, but how am I actually using it to create a better experience, a more tailored offer, to really talk to my consumers? I think what's happening now with, during this COVID time, yeah, there is an increase of usage, but it's not just time spent, it's where are they spending it? I think you've seen, more and more people, obviously during COVID times, using delivery services, the Grabs or Gojeks of the world. You've seen a multiplicity of use for entertainment, OTT services. You see people doing, obviously a lot more transacting online than they did, more social selling when you're stuck at home and you want to sell vegetables to your friends or something in your garden or some rice or dresses you make or whatever it is. So I think the interesting part is not simply the sheer amount of time online, it's where they're spending that time and the multiplicity of activities that I think become more ingrained than in people's lives. Because if you've had an uptick, you may be an average middle-class consumer who did a few, commerce transactions. Obviously, if you're in China, you probably do a ton of them. And I've seen people that become much more habituated to online shopping that probably post-pandemic will have discovered the ease of subscription, of delivery to their homes, that simply won't go back to their traditional shopping venues, or not to the same degree they did before. And so I think that's the interesting story. The other thing I would say about digital is you've got to think in tiers, because you've got still a major part of Asia emerging that is not digitally connected yet. I mean, despite all the cell phones in the world and all the digital connectivity, you still have a digital divide that people are trying to close, particularly for emerging middle class. You've got an incredible middle class, that 2 billion middle class consumers that emerged over the last 20 plus years, who have digital technology that, as I said, are just using it now in more and more ways, right? But you've also got, an upper end of technology, whether it's electric vehicles, what's happening with AI, what's happening with a lot more sophisticated use of voice. You got a kind of whole spectrum of technology that's being used, and different consumer uptake of it, depending upon their lifestyle and frankly, their access. And so I think brands have got to be thinking about that too, depending upon who they're selling to, right?
So I guess much as the rest of our life, there is no simple answer.
Well, I just think it's hard to make one statement about, what is the majority of the human population, which resides in Asia, and the reality that you've got, a pretty disparate group of people in terms of economic income. But, I talk mostly to the middle class because that's really been the great Asian story and will continue to be, as you move from, kind of minority middle class to majority middle class in many of the countries of Asia. In our study about velocity, really South Asia, particularly India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and then you would add to it places like Indonesia, Vietnam, where the growth of the middle class is profound and will continue to be. So I think the middle of the market is really very interesting because that's really the big reshaper of so much of what is happening.
It's interesting, I had not heard that statistic you cited earlier about 150 million people falling out of the middle class. That's really incredible.
It is, but that, it kind of tracks to the article that you published, which is you've got a lot of people who've been in the informal economy who, are not able to economically participate. And the big question is, will the restarting of economies allow them to get back to the track they were on, or will those jobs disappear, or simply be a lot less, and you'll have a group of people that were on a track or emerging middle class who don't emerge, or it may take them 10 years to get there. You also have the worry that a lot of the progress that was made, for example, in female education, which I wrote about in the article, the concern from the UN is that 11 million girls won't go back to school. And obviously education has been a big driver. Yeah, it is. It's concerning. And those, so while we're hopeful and optimistic about the return, I don't think anybody can be glib about the economic view because there are still major questions about the economic return and the social impact, as I said, of female education being one of those points that we still have to wait and see. And so it is pretty profound because I think the world has gotten used to a model over 30 years of an increasing decline of poverty, a substantial growth of middle class or emerging middle class, and that's on a kind of purchasing parity basis. So relative to the society they're in, they're middle class. And, so it's been a big reversal. And, there have been other reversals during, the economic shock, the Asian economic shock of, 97, 98, obviously 2008, 2009. So, there have been certainly along this road some other shocks, but this has been kind of, the pandemic has obviously been on a scale that's been unseen. And so that some of this is still to be seen, but I think there's enough momentum and scale and a model there that when there's access to work, when people aren't literally stuck at home, when the hotels are open and, there are a number of jobs that come back, then hopefully that economic engine and that growth path is able to continue. But it may take a bit of time in some places, right?
Well, yeah, let's hope this thing wraps up soon. You're only an hour flight away. I hope we can continue this conversation in person. I appreciate you sitting down with me today. It was real interesting, and all the best to you and yours.
Same to you. I look forward to meeting you in person. Okay.
All right. Take care.